Welcome to my training, Knowing What to Say, How Client Motivation Guides What You Say. My name is Dr. Jordan Harris. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and supervisor, and a licensed professional counselor and supervisor. And today I want to tell you a story because I think we have a problem in the field of therapy. I think we don't know what to say. My evidence for this comes from two sources. The first is this article by Jantz and colleagues. It's called Disentangling the Therapist Effect, Clustering Therapists by Using Different Treatment Outcomes. Basically, some researchers in Europe studied about 5,582 different clients seen by about 68 different therapists and ranked them according to a bunch of different outcomes. And what they found was that they could roughly group therapists into four broad categories. First were the referrers. These are therapists who had average to good outcomes on things like client outcome surveys, right? If you give a client a survey of how their symptoms are going down over time, these scored about average or kind of good. And they also tended to refer out a lot of people. This is a fine group, right? Then you had so that's about 13%, 14% of therapists. Then you had about 20%, 22% of therapists who they called the talent. And these were therapists who were highly effective with clients. Clients loved them. And not only did the client's symptoms get better over time on these sort of surveys, on the client satisfaction surveys, the clients actually reported liking the therapist a lot. So these are therapists who have great bonds with their clients and are able to help their clients. Then you had another group of therapists that the researchers basically found to be ineffective. This was to about 25, 26% of therapists. Um, on client outcomes measures, they didn't do well. And when I mean outcome measures, I mean things like the PHQ-9, the GAD-7, the CORE, the OQ-45. If you give a client a survey of their symptoms over time, that's what I mean by an outcome measure. And these therapists, their clients are not getting better over time. Worse than that, these clients also reported not liking their therapist. And then you have the last group. I call these the mixed baggers. Basically, they were good for some, not good for others. This is about 38, 39% of therapists. And these therapists basically had high dropout rates. They had a lot of clients who, after, say, 4 or 5 sessions, dropped out of therapy. And they did not generally do well on their outcome surveys. But for a small minority of their clients, they did really well. They actually outperformed the talent. And when I saw this, I was sort of struck. We, of course, need further replications for this, but the basic implication of this study is that a quarter, right, 23% of therapists to about 65% of therapists are not helping clients, or at least not helping the majority of their caseloads. Um, Around this time, I also saw this report from Cintio. Cintio is a counseling center and therapist training institute at a university and in California. And they gave all of the clients in their clinic a survey. And what they found was that 96% of their clients were already using AI, and about half of them, 49%, were using AI for mental health support. And when they asked those clients, how does the AI now compare to your therapist? Um, about 75% of them said that the AI is as good or better than their therapist. And this was last year. And these models are only going to get better. I think what this means is that we have a problem where a quarter to 60% of therapists are not helping a large number of their clients. And now we're entering into a world where we're going to have to compete for clients with AI. Um, and when you read the report, the things that the clients say about the AI when they use it as a therapist, to me, is just really striking. Clients say things like, I usually talk to it, meaning the AI, like a chat GPT type thing, when I'm feeling lonely or super depressed. It's nice that it just listens, but also that it gives me more actionable advice and really helpful encouragement. It's especially helpful because I have severe social anxiety. So it's a little easier to talk to AI than a human therapist. Clients say things like, I'm autistic and find it difficult to understand the motives and emotions of other people. I mostly use LLMs, that's AI, to calm myself down when having crises and ask questions pertaining to the situation that I don't understand. Clients say things like, I've had a wonderful experience and I don't know what I would do at this point without having LLM instant support. They say things like, I had a crisis related to a death in the family and couldn't reach anybody else in the middle of the night. LLM got me through the night until I could talk to somebody. The one of the co-authors, two of the co-authors of this article were recently on a podcast, and I would show you the video, but I can't for copyright reasons. But this link will hyperlink to it. You should watch the video. It's just like a 5 minute. This is a 2 minute clip, and the interviewer asked Tony, one of the lead researchers, like, why did you start researching this? And Tony said, basically, starting off, I was very skeptical. It just sounds ridiculous. Like, how would an AI be able to do what I do? It doesn't really make sense. And then he says that all changed in late 2024. I was talking to a friend who had recently lost his job. He mentioned he was using ChatGPT as his therapist. I was shocked and asked, what do you mean? Is it like giving you advice on finding a new job? No, he told me. It's giving me emotional support. He was talking about feeling depressed, demoralized, and how to build his confidence. And these are the exact things you talk about in therapy. And I asked if it was helping, and he said, oh, yeah, I can't afford my regular therapist anymore. And this is just as good. After that conversation, I started seeing the same pattern everywhere: Reddit, Facebook, and Twitter, full of posts of people using ChatGPT for therapy. I think we have a problem. We have an epidemic of a large number of therapists who are ineffective and clients who are getting a lot out of AI. And I think that this is very complicated, right? I'm not pro using AI as a therapist. I think that we need human therapists. But I do think that, like the title of this clip says, many therapists are ignoring how clients are using AI. And there is something important happening when our clients are turning towards AI instead of turning towards us. There is something important happening. And as therapists, our first calling, I think, is to listen to our clients. And so if our clients are using AI instead of turning to therapists, if our clients are saying AI is as good or better than my therapist is right now, that means that there's something that we need to be listening to in what they're saying. This, I think, impacts therapists in multiple ways, right? Well, first off, from a business standpoint, I think it impacts us because if you're not able to do effective work, you're not keeping clients, right? High dropout means you have low retention. And so if you're trying to build a caseload, then this is very important that you solve this problem. I think this also comes to how effective we feel in the room, right? Like How many of us know a therapist who's done this job for 5 or 6 years and they're completely burnt out? Like that burnt out feeling comes from hopelessness, which comes from feeling like, man, I'm not really good at my job. And then you also have, I think, the vocational, like this calling that many of us have to help people. And so when our clients aren't actually feeling better, like that deeply impacts us. And I think many of us want to help our clients. So the question then becomes, what did we do? And I actually have some more bad news because I think most of the things we have done in the past don't work. If any of you are familiar with the work of Scott Miller, he really popularized this idea of what is now called common factors. And he gave a great overview of this in another video clip that he did. Click the link. I would advise you to watch the video clip. Um, it's really fascinating. The summary is that in his book, Heart and Soul of Change, the first edition, they basically looked at what are all the different factors that make therapy effective. What they found is in that original research, they said that the model you use contributes about 15% to the outcome of therapy. In the following years, they've done more studies and done more research, and they've basically found that the model that you use contributes 1% to the outcome of therapy. And that's hard for many of us to hear because the thing we tell therapists to do when they're struggling, right? If a supervisee comes into your office, or if you've ever been a supervisee in a supervisor's office, right? And you have a couple come in, or someone who has OCD, or someone who's struggling with addiction, you ask them, like, what should I do? They will often say something like, maybe you should get trained in EFT. Maybe you should get trained in trauma-focused CBT. Maybe you should get trained in play therapy. Like whatever the problem is, they give you a model to sort of address that problem. But the research basically says that when you look at the outcomes in relation to the model has about a 1% impact on the outcome. Um, so what actually makes therapy effective? And Scott outlines it in this interview. It's a 5-minute interview. You should definitely watch the interview. Scott at one point says, the point we're making here is that there are other things that contribute to the outcome of therapy. Like, does your therapy have a structure that a client can sort of follow? Are you creating hope and expectation, or are you really struggling to create hope and expectation in your client? Um, is there some sort of relational issue between you and the client? He says most of us do really well most of the time in relationship with our clients, and then there's certain clients, certain issues that the relationship breaks down pretty consistently. And knowing how to deal with those moments is what actually separates the best therapists from the therapists who aren't doing well. And so what he says basically is that the point that we're making here is you engage in your performance and we assess it. And if you find that a specific kind of client or problem you aren't as effective as your overall average, we map it onto these factors. Does it have to do with the structure of the therapy? Is there a failure to create hope and expectation? Is there poor engagement or a specific reaction to that client? And once we map that problem to the correct factor, we can develop exercises to help you work that factor to the benefit of both you and your client. What this means is that our models won't save us. And I have some bad news because the other thing that we say to therapists is that if you're struggling, don't worry, you need more experience, right? Trust yourself, get used to being in the room, those sorts of things. Well, there was an article that has since been replicated. I believe it's been replicated by Simon Goldberg and a few of the colleagues. They looked at 170 therapists over about up to 18 years, and they looked at how they did over time. And what they saw was that therapist performance mostly stayed flat. See this line right here? The therapists did not reliably get better over time. If anything, if you sort of dig into the minutia of this data, it tends to get a little bit worse over time. And they think that that's because therapists over time get really comfortable, they get really used to what they're doing, they don't try as hard, and so their outcomes get slightly worse over time. And so our skills wilt over time. So just to recap, we're moving into a world where we're having to compete with artificial intelligence for clients. Where 20 to 25% to 60% of therapists are not helping the majority of their caseload. And the things we told therapists to do, that the more experience they get, or the more times they get trained in a certain model, the more effective they're going to be, those things actually don't work. And this leads us to then what do we actually do? In order to answer that question, I'm going to try to do three things today. I'm going to talk about process coding. I'm going to talk about motivation, and I'm going to talk about resistance. The Scott Miller pictured here from the past quote that I just mentioned, one of the things that he sort of pioneered is this idea of deliberate practice. That in any field, the way people get better by looking at their weaknesses, analyzing them, and then developing specific techniques and practices to improve those specific weaknesses. He also said that what we need to be doing as therapists is what he calls routine outcome monitoring. In the insurance world, they call this value-based care. There's a bunch of other words for it, but basically the idea is that you give a client a survey, you have the session, and then you give them a survey the next time and you have the session. And if you do that before each and every session, you can track how the client is doing over time. And that gives you real, objective, clear feedback on how the client is doing. If you want to read a book about this, I love the book Better Results. It came out, I think, 2020, 2021. Phenomenal book, easy to read. I would definitely pick up a copy if I were you. So those are the two things that Scott says, right? We need to be doing deliberate practice and we need to be engaging in monitoring and tracking our outcomes. Well, these two researchers, Henny Westra, pictured here on the left, I think it is for you guys. And then you have Alyssa Di Bartolomeo, who's the younger researcher. They wrote a paper that came out in 2024, I believe, where basically they said, we totally believe Scott. The research is out there. Clearly, if you are tracking your outcomes and doing deliberate practice, like you're going to get better. But we think that there's a faster way. Our job, what we do in our day-to-day research, is we watch tape and we analyze it for our research. And we analyze it along the lines of motivation and resistance. And what we found is that because we're trained specifically to see what's happening in the room, we are much more able to pick up on what is happening in these micro moments of therapy that is derailing the therapist. They basically say routine outcome monitoring is great, but it's very slow. You give a client a survey, you have a session, you wait a week, you get them to fill out another survey. Like that's a week-long feedback loop. But because we've trained at observing tape, we can see in real time where these breakdowns are happening. And this is what we call process coding. And if you think back to what Scott was saying in that quote, right? Scott is saying that the things that really make therapy pop are things like hope, expectancy, relationship factors, and those things have outsized impact on the outcome of therapy, even beyond your model. So my conjecture is that what we need to be focusing on as we train and as we learn is learning to see therapy process. Now, this can all sound very abstract, right? Like, what is therapy process? What are we talking about? A researcher will say that process is like the building blocks of therapy. It's all these little moments made up of what the client does, how it impacts the therapist, what the therapist does, and how it impacts the client. And they're very clear that process is different than models. Models are usually like these big picture sort of things that they talk about. They're often grounded in some sort of orienting theory. And process is more about the micro moves. I know that still can be a little esoteric, but I'll tell you a story. So a few years ago, I think it was 2024, I made a bunch of Christmas cookies for the holidays. My wife's side of the family, they do these Christmas stockings. And so everyone has to bring a treat and put it in the stockings. You get, little knickknacks, lottery cards, candy. And I decided to make my mom's famous Christmas cookies. And I made them, follow the recipe. I was super excited about them. I made them a little smaller than usual because the recipe calls for a ice cream scoop size of dough. I'm like, this is like, these are massive cookies. And my wife's side of the family have a ton of family members. And so I wanted to make more cookies. And so I just made them a little smaller, put them in bags, put them in everyone's stockings for Christmas. And at Christmas, my sister-in-law comes up to me. She says, "These cookies are great, Jordan. I'm so glad you made them. Thank you for making them." And I said to my sister-in-law, "Yeah, they turned out okay. Um, I I'm not entirely happy with them though because they're a little bit burnt, just a little bit." And my sister-in-law had told her the whole story, and she said, "Oh, I know what you did wrong. And if you are a baker, you already know what I did wrong. If you're not a baker, take a moment and guess." Basically, what I did wrong, I asked my sister-in-law, "So what the heck did I do wrong?" She said, "Well, um you didn't use an ice cream scooper, right?" I said, "Yeah." "You made the cookie smaller, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." She says, "Well, I mean, if you make cookies smaller, they take less time to cook. So then they get burnt." I was like, "Of course. Of course. That's exactly it." Luckily, I have an extra, pound of dough in the freezer. So I go home a week later, pull out the cookies, throw them in the oven, cook them for less time because I'm making smaller cookies. And the cookies come out and they are doughy. And I don't know what the heck happened. They were smaller, yes, but I cooked them for less time and I couldn't figure out what happened. And if you're a baker, you already know what I did wrong. So I'm talking to my wife and she says, "Oh, I know what you did wrong." And I say, "What is it?" She says, "You took the dough right out of the freezer." So yeah. Well, the dough is cold. And if the dough is cold, it's going to take longer for it to heat up. So the cookies are going to need to cook for longer. And I was like, obviously. And like that's process. You can follow the same recipe, but there are these other processes that dictate the outcome. If you're making cookies and you're following the recipe to a T, but you're not attending to these other processes, the size of the cookie, to the temperature of the dough, it can have a huge impact on the outcome. And that's what we mean by therapy process. If the model is the recipe, this is what you do. You can follow the model to a T. But if you're not attending to these other processes, how ready is your client? Then even if you're following the same recipe, you're not going to get the same outcome. So there are many different processes, just like with cookies, right? Just like with baking, there are different processes. You have the temperature of the dough, you have the, how hot the oven cooks, you have the size of the cookie, all these different processes. You have the same sort of thing in therapy. Tons of different processes, motivation, experiencing, persuasiveness, marital conflict, all these sorts of different things. And in fact, you all know a famous process coder, right? John Gottman is a famous process coder. He made this coding system called SPAF, the specific affect coding system, which codes marital conflict. And what he found was that four of those codes relate directly to client, couples longevity. And so if you have these four codes, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, then, excuse me, then your relationship disintegrates within 7 years. So that's what we mean by process coding. And what we're going to look at today is one specific process, the process of motivation. Now, motivation has two sides. You have the client side and the therapist side. And we're going to take a crash course through both today. If you look at if you look at the way therapists or clients talk about problems in their behaviors, you can generally put it into three or four different buckets. So the first thing that you're looking for is if the client gives you a target behavior. Target behavior is this research word for a goal. So they have a goal. Once they have a goal set, then clients would generally say things either in favor of that goal or moving away from that goal. So, for instance, if a client comes in and they say, I'm anxious and I want to stop being anxious, they might give you a bunch of things, a bunch of reasons why they should change. I want to feel calmer again. I really want my heart to stop racing. I want to not smoke so much weed. Like they might say any sort of number of things, right? And researchers code this as change talk. And if any of you have been trained in motivational interviewing, a lot of this will sound very similar. I do want to make the point, though, that in this framework, we're not thinking of motivational interviewing as a model, but as a way to understand this process of motivation. So this is a process first sort of lens. If a client comes in and they say, I'm really anxious and I want to stop being anxious, they might also then say things that are reasons why they can't change, reasons why they should stay the same. They might say things like, I've been anxious my whole life. They might say things like, my family thinks it's a problem, but it's not really that bad. They might say things like, I'm just like my mom. She was anxious. It's probably genetic. And we would call these counter change or sustained talk. Sometimes, though, clients say both. In one moment, they will say something that's about change, and in the next moment, they'll say something saying that they can't change, right? They'll say, I need to work on my anxiety because I'm always overwhelmed. And then they'll say, it's just who I am. They'll say, this anxiety is really impacting my relationships. And then they'll say, but I don't know, maybe it's my brain chemistry. They'll say, I really want to work on this anxiety so I can sleep better. And then they'll say, I've tried everything and nothing works. And this, when you go back and forth, is what researchers called ambivalence. But there's a fourth thing that clients can do, and it's resistance. Now, I know resistance is a charged word. Whenever I give this training all over the world, people often push back against this definition, against this word. And I want to be very clear. For many people, resistance has this idea, this connotation attached to it, that either the therapist did something wrong or the client is bad. And that is not what I'm saying at all. That's not what the researchers say when they're using this as a definition. The researchers that I'm following in this whole training, they mean something very specific with resistance. They mean any opposition to the therapist or the therapist's perceived direction, the therapist's proposed direction in therapy. Any opposition to the therapist or the therapy or the therapist's proposed direction in therapy. Anytime that happens, that's resistance. It's not bad. It doesn't mean anyone's done anything wrong. It's a very normal thing. But anytime that happens, that's what we mean by resistance. I gave a training in Poland in 2025, the end of 2025. And I was going through this. I gave a few examples, and people were saying, yeah, but that's not really resistance. The client really isn't doing anything wrong. And one person said, oh, I get it now. Any disagreement between therapist and client, no matter how small, is resistance. And I thought, yes, exactly. That's it. You got it. You got it. So let's look at some examples, right? Your client comes in, they're giving you change talk, and you say, let's try challenging those thoughts. And they say, I've tried that before. It doesn't work. The client is not being bad or wrong. You're not stupid for asking the client to challenge those thoughts. The client is saying, no, I don't want to do that. That's resistance, according to this definition, according to this line of research. The therapist might say, let's try challenging those thoughts. And the client might say, I think I'm pretty good already at catching my thoughts. They're saying I don't want to do that. The client might say, I don't see how that will help. They're basically saying, I don't want to do that. Now, the reason why is different, right? In this one, they're saying I don't see how it would help. That's that might mean that if they did see how it would help, that they might be willing to try it. That's different than I've already tried that and it doesn't work for me. So the reason behind it can be very different. It's still resistance because they're basically saying no. A client could say, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. All these are ways that the client has says no. So once you sort of have this framework that there are basically four things clients can do, right? This is not comprehensive. This is just a very basic framework to think about therapy. Clients can either give you change talk, they can give you ambivalence, which is change talk and counter change talk. They can give you only counter change talk, and they can give you resistance. And what this means is that you can roughly think of clients as being in one of four levels of motivation. They can be motivated, where they're giving you tons of change talk all the time. They can be ambivalent, where they're giving you both change talk and sustained talk, reasons for changing and reasons for staying the same. They can be unmotivated, where they're giving you sustained talk, or they can be resistant, where they're opposing the direction of the therapy or they're opposing the therapist. And here's the whole point of this whole thing, that what you say, what you say depends entirely on where the client is in on the levels of motivation. That if you understand the client's level of motivation, you know what to say and when to say it. For instance, if a client is highly motivated, this is when you just offer the intervention, right? Whatever your big intervention is. If you're a IFS person, this is when you do the parts work. If you do chair work, this is when you do the chair work. If you do EMDR, this is when you do the sets. If you're a body worker, this is when you do the body work stuff, right? Like if they're motivated, that's when you'd say, hey, let's do this, whatever it is. If a client is ambivalent and you try to do the intervention, well, I'm guessing you already know what happens, right? Clients will spin, they'll say yes, they'll say no, they'll sort of, wander around it. Um, and so instead of offering the intervention directly then, if the client is ambivalent, then you want to test the waters and reflect both sides of the ambivalence. The client is unmotivated. They're giving you tons of sustained talk. The thing to do then is to offer empathy, of course, and then see if there is a goal the client wants, right? So I'll give you an example. I watched a tape of this beautiful, beautiful therapist, and she has a mandated client comes in. He is not happy to be there. He came in because he got a DUI, and he's not motivated to stop drinking. Doesn't think it's a problem. And the therapist talks to him, and he is motivated to get out of the court system. So you see, you switch the goal, right? There's this sort of preordained goal about the court system. She has leeway enough at her clinic, which not all of us do, to work on something different. And for her in this situation, it's like, okay, we're gonna work on you getting out of the court system. So you pick a different goal. And then the lowest, biggest problem is resistance. And if you're in the resistance, the big thing is to get out of the resistance. For me, this was like a landmark sort of thing for a few different reasons. One, because I think I had this sense, I think many of us do, that if your client isn't changing, you aren't doing good therapy. And for me, what this means is as long as you're matching your intervention to the client's level of motivation, you're doing great. You're doing great. That's it. The other thing that struck me was most of the way that we're trained, most of our models start at the motivation level, right? They assume clients are here at the top of the sort of chain, that they're already highly motivated. And then we can just offer them the intervention and that they'll take it and they'll just change. And I think the reality is that most of our clients are not at this top level of motivation. They're not highly motivated. Most of our clients are ambivalent or unmotivated. Um, a lot of this research comes from the work of the two researchers I told you about earlier, Henny Westra and Alyssa Di Bartolomeo. And what they basically found was that the big thing that therapists often miss, that they don't see, is resistance. And that's a big problem because when it's mishandled, it has a negative impact on the therapy up to a year later. Probably longer. Probably longer. I say longer for two reasons. One, in a research setting, it's really hard to track clients over a long period of time. And so they just couldn't track clients that long. I also say that because there's a few case studies where that's happened. So if you've ever seen the Gloria tapes, or more formally known as the three approaches to psychotherapy, there's this classic set of therapy tapes where this one lady, Gloria, saw three famous therapists, Fritz Perls, Albert Ellis, and Carl Rogers. And they recorded the sessions, and then it was like the first video recorded training tapes for therapists. It was like a big deal. And at the end of the sessions, Gloria got to choose who she went home with. And she chose to go home with Fritz Perls, who, according to all the research that I'm about to show you, entirely mishandled Gloria's resistance. Now, on the surface, that sounds like, okay, so apparently he did a good job, even though he was not doing all the things that we're going to talk about, right? Well, Gloria ended up dying of cancer like in her 40s, and her daughter wrote a book about her mom and her mom's experience being the subject of the Gloria tapes. And what she said was, my mom always regretted her decision. My mom felt like working with Fritz Perls actually like damaged her deeply. And she wished she had worked with Carl Rogers. And if you watch the tapes, Carl Rogers handled the resistance perfectly. Perfectly. So the whole point of this is that when we don't see what's happening, we say the wrong things, and it can have a negative impact on our clients. And if you think back all the way to, did I actually get to it? The Scott Miller quote. Essentially, what he's saying is we have these specific moments with clients where the relationship breaks down and we don't know how to repair them. And that process has a huge impact on the outcome of the therapy, even more than the model that we're using. Even more than the model that we're using. So, um,
I can see two options here.
what I want to do here is show you some clips of resistance and break down why they are resistance. And then we're going to talk about how you can respond to these moments.
One would be to commit to cooking a certain number of times a week to begin with. Maybe not try to do it every night, but definitely, 1 or 2 nights I'm spending a little while cooking. Or I could try just cooking on the weekends and cooking a lot of food that I could eat throughout the week. Both of those sound like they'd be good ideas.
Right, you can certainly generate those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So, how might you decide which of those two would be the more workable one for you?
So in this
I can
clip,
see two
the client is saying, I could do one of two different things. Did you catch the resistance?
options here. One would be to commit to cooking a certain number of times a week to begin with. Maybe not try to do it every night,
It's
but
coming up.
definitely 1 or 2 nights
Here it
I'm
is.
spending a little while cooking. Or I could try just cooking on the weekends and
Ready?
cooking a lot of food that I could eat throughout the week. Both of those sound like they'd be good ideas.
Both of those they sound like they could be good ideas. This is a lady she's giving out a few ideas and she's saying that they sound good, but I don't think I can actually do them.
Both of those sound like they'd be good ideas.
You hear it?
Right, you can certainly.
Let's watch another clip.
I mean, I don't think I have a problem. My boyfriend thinks that I drink too much, but I mean, that's his opinion. So,
This one's more clear, right? She's talking to this therapist about her drinking issue, and the client says, "Yeah, therapist, I mean, she's basically saying to the therapist, "Yeah, I mean, you're sort of here, and the assumption is that I have a problem, but I don't think I actually have a problem. Other people do, but I don't think that I do."
the problem. My boyfriend thinks that I drink.
Oh,
I can see
I mean, I don't think I have a problem. My boyfriend thinks that I drink too much, but I mean, that's his opinion. So,
so there you go. Let's watch another clip of resistance.
Just on a practical level, do you need to start getting ready to leave for places sooner?
I don't know. I try. If I give myself an hour and then the next day I'm like, okay, an hour and a half, and the next day 2 hours, I'm like, I cannot be getting ready all day.
No, you can't.
So
that's not the answer. Right.
So there's a very gentle, right? Again, a very gentle implied direction from the therapist
Just on a practical level, do you need to start getting ready to leave for places sooner?
that maybe this client should start getting ready earlier so she can get ready to leave on time, right?
I don't know. I try.
Do you need to start getting ready to leave for places sooner?
I don't know. I try. If I give myself an hour and then the next day I'm like, okay, an hour and a half, and the next day 2 hours, I'm like, I cannot be getting ready all day.
No.
And the client says, I can't do that. I can't be getting ready all day. It doesn't work for me.
What's the reason that she's asked you to come in?
Oh, God.
she had a whole bunch of these like little trainee nurse people running to her and complaining about how I manage them. And it's outrageous. You know, they come in, they're hardly trained. I don't know what they do at universities anymore with these people. But you know, there's one did a shockingly bad attempt, which she called giving an injection. It was just ridiculous. And then, you know, like the minute you sort of like say to them, this is a problem, be professional, pull your act together, off they trot with their little tails between their legs, going, you know, whinging about my behavior. And now I'm sitting here with you. Right. I mean, no offense, I'm sure you're great at what you do, but like, I could be out there doing my job.
Right. Oh, look, she's saying I don't have a problem. I shouldn't be here. So, what do we say in these moments? What do we say in these moments? The big idea, just to recap, the big idea is that if you respond, this is the summary of what of everything we're going to talk about here. If you respond to resistance with any sort of demands for change, no matter how gentle, you likely increase resistance. If you respond to resistance with empathy, you likely decrease resistance. And this is important because how we handle these moments of resistance has an outsized impact on the outcome of therapy. How we handle these micro moments of resistance, of when the client says no, thank you, has a huge impact on the outcome of therapy. Now, I want to be clear. There are other things that we should do in different parts, depending on the client's level of motivation. So we shouldn't always do this, but when we're in this level right here, right, this bottom level, that's what we're talking about. So what do we do when clients are showing resistance? Well, researchers, they have codified the different kinds of responses that we can give. And they will watch your tape and they will give you points. And they'll give you negative points if you're being directive in the face of resistance, right? Directive means any sort of push that the client should be different. Problem solving, leading, shaping and reframing, focus on problem resolution, being just generally directive, judgmental, or cheerleading. Some of these are really obvious, right? Like, don't be judgmental of your clients. But some of them are less obvious. You know, problem solving, we've sort of all been, you know, with a parent, right? And we talk to them about some problem that we're having, and they jump straight to a solution. So problem solving, and we probably have all done this, where someone comes to us, a friend, a partner, a child, and we jump straight with some sort of pain. You know, Dad, I'm really struggling with this. I don't know what to do. And we jump straight to problem solving. And so we know that that one can sort of not always be what is helpful, even when we ourselves do it, right? But even things like cheerleading, where we're just like really encouraging people, like trying to push them and encourage them to like keep moving forward, um, has a positive intent, obviously, right? It's way better than like judgment, but it still is directive. You're still implying or pushing or encouraging the person to change, and that likely only increases the resistance. On the other side of this, the most evidence-based response in the face of resistance is to offer a reflection. When I was getting trained in all this stuff, my teacher basically said that the beauty of a reflection, it is how we demonstrate empathy. You're literally showing a person, I understand you, because you're repeating back to them what they're saying. There are other things that you can do, and if you add these in to your reflection, when they sort of code your responses, they give you bonus points, right? So if you do like a reflection and talk about the person's autonomy, you get 1 point for the reflection, 1 point for the autonomy, so you get 2 points total, right? If you give a reflection and you validate the client, you get 1 point for the reflection and 1 point for the validation. If you affirm the client, right? If you do collaborative problem solving, how can we work together to resolve this issue? Then you get an extra point. If you give enthusiastic support, let's totally do that. I'm all on board with that. Or you normalize. Tons of people feel the same way that you do. Then you get these points. But again, remember the big idea is that on this line right here, it's all about being directive. It's anything you do that implies the client should be different, and that gives you negative points. And on this side over here, you basically want to reflect and then do something else to show the client that you accept them just as they are right now. So with that, let's watch some of these therapist responses. And what I want you to do as you watch this is to try to figure out if this therapist is making an error or not an error. Try to figure out if this therapist knows what to say or if they're saying the wrong thing.
I can see two options here. One would be to commit to cooking a certain number of times a week to begin with. Maybe not try to do it every night, but definitely 1 or 2 nights I'm spending a little while cooking. Or I could try just cooking on the weekends and cooking a lot of food that I could eat throughout the week. Both of those sound like they'd be good ideas.
Right, you can certainly generate those ideas. So how might you decide which of those two would be the more workable one for you?
How might you decide which of those two would be the more workable one for you? This therapist is proceeding with the intervention, right? She's continuing to push for this idea that the client needs to change. Now, I want to be very clear. It is not at all that you should never push a client to make an action, to take a step. That very well may be the right thing to do at certain points in the therapy. What we're saying in this training is that if you push in the moment of resistance, that is likely to increase the resistance. When I was trained in this stuff, my colleagues and friends, my colleagues who've now become friends, basically said, it's all about timing. It's all about timing. You have to know what to say when. And if you push when the client is being resistant, and the client is showing resistance, you likely only deepen the resistance. So that is the wrong time to push. So this would be an error.
I don't think I have a problem. My boyfriend thinks that I drink too much, but that's his opinion. So
You've heard a little bit of concern from your boyfriend, but somehow it doesn't really seem to make sense to you.
This therapist, before I say, write down your answer. Do you think this therapist made a mistake, made an error, or does she know what to say? This therapist offers a reflection. And so she's demonstrating empathy. So it is likely that this client becomes less resistant, shows less resistance. And that means then that she's right on board. She's right on point. She knows exactly what to say when.
Just on a practical level, do you need to start getting ready to leave for places sooner?
I don't know. I try. If I give myself an hour and then the next day I'm like, okay, an hour and a half, and the next day 2 hours, I'm like, I cannot be getting ready all day.
No, you can't.
So
that's not the answer.
We talked about this clip being resistance, and I want to say one other thing here. Resistance can kind of be tricky. And what I want you to think about is imagine you'd ask someone out and they gave you this response. I would really like to. I just don't know when we would go out. Like, I'm really busy most days. And if I try to give you an answer now, I'm just gonna not be able to make it. Like, if you asked a guy or a girl out and they gave you that sort of response, that's basically a no. And that's what we're trying to say here, right? Is that that's a no. So they're basically saying that it's not going to work for me. So let's see how this therapist responds. Oh,
It's not the answer. Right. Sometimes when, or at least when, my kids, my youngest is now 18, but when my kids were younger and I'd find myself getting all worked up, it would be because I had these certain kind of expectations for them. Like they should be this way and they shouldn't be doing this. And it's so important that I be able to do X, Y, and Z so that we can get someplace on time. And things just seemed overly important that looking back, I would say, well, why did it really matter that if we were 15 minutes late? Or
So write down your answer. Does this therapist know what to say, or is she making some sort of error? This therapist is basically saying that your expectations are too high and that maybe you should lower your expectations. So she's implying that the client should change.
just expectations for them, like certain kind of expectations for them, like they should be this way and they shouldn't be doing this. And it's so important that I be able to do X, Y, and Z so that we can get someplace on time. And things just seemed overly important that looking back, I would say, well, why did it really matter that if we were 15 minutes late? Or
Right? I mean, the therapist is even saying things seem overly important to you, but you should actually change how you view things. Again, not a horrible thing to say to people at certain times. What we're saying here is that this is not the time to say that. All right, one more clip.
What's the reason that she's asked you to come in?
Oh, God. She had a whole bunch of these like little training nurse people running to her and complaining about how I manage them. And it's outrageous. They come in, they're hardly trained. I don't know what they do at universities anymore with these people. But this one did a shockingly bad attempt, which she called giving an injection. It was just ridiculous. And then, like the minute you sort of like say to them, this is a problem, be professional, pull your act together, off they trot with their little tails between their legs going, whinging about my behavior. And now I'm sitting here with you. I mean, no offense, I'm sure you're great at what you do, but like, I could be out there doing my job.
Right. So the impression I'm getting from you is that it's not something that you really see the need to do to come in here, but it's something that you've been kind of forced into doing.
So write down your answer. Does this therapist make an error? Does he know does he know what to say? Or is he saying the wrong thing? Is he making an error? This therapist basically offers a reflection. He's demonstrating empathy. So he's right on track. Look, that's the end of our hour. I love talking about the stuff. I could do it for hours. In fact, sometimes I do. But for you, what are the actual next steps? These videos are taken from an assessment called the term. And the term rates therapists' ability to see and respond to errors in therapy. If you want to take the full term, click this link. It should take you right to it. You can take the term and it'll give you your answers so you can see how you do yourself when you are looking for resistance and how you track so that you can see how well you can see and respond to resistance, right? So that you can see how well you know what to say. I'm not saying that really well, but I think you know what I mean.
I don't think I have a problem.
The other thing that you can do is you can go and look up this interview. Light Up the Couch. I did an interview with them. It's a deep dive on all this sort of stuff. Because it's an interview, it is much more conversational, hits the brain in a different way. I mean, I think you might get a lot out of it. You might get a lot out of it. So you also can do that. And I want to end with this. Look, my whole heart behind all of this is that therapists can have a wonderfully fulfilling job, right? And I mean that like on all the levels. That one, they can keep clients and make a living for their families. Two, that they that we can really feel empowered and confident when we're sitting with people because we know what to say and when to say it. And then even more than all of that, that we can really help people. I mean, I would bet that many of you became therapists because you had a therapist who changed your life. And you thought, I want to do the same for other people. And so you went to school, you were to write the books, you wrote the papers to become not someone who reads books and papers and that sort of stuff, but to be the kind of person who can sit with people in their pain and really, really help them. And I hope that this training has helped you a little bit along that path. So, until next time, I'll see you later.